All right. Good evening,
Hey, Jen.
everyone. My name is Jen Zinkler, and on behalf of the Heart of Iowa Dems communications team, I'd like to thank you for being with us tonight or at some point in the future for those who watch the recording later. We are very excited to welcome you to the second in our four-part series on climate change, this one focusing on issues of air quality and particulate pollution. We'll first hear presentations from each of the two panelists, followed by in-depth conversation between them about what is and what has been occurring in the air in Iowa and the lasting consequences here and elsewhere. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. You can view a transcript of this conversation by selecting live transcription on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We are live streaming this event on the Heart of Iowa Dems Facebook page. Check the chat for that link should you want to invite anybody else in last minute. And we will also post the recording on our YouTube channel by the same name and email you the links for both. Again, both panelists tonight will present first on aspects of Iowa's air pollution problem and links to climate change, and then we will hear the two of them in conversation, answering questions from participants that have come in. If you've got a question, drop it in the chat room. Just click the chat button on the toolbar. And now I'd like to introduce the forum participants for this evening. Closing out 20 years in the Iowa legislature, Rob Hogg retired from his state senator position just last year. He is now the acting temporary chair of the Iowa Democratic Party's Climate Change and Environmental Caucus that is being assembled right now, and I'll leave it to him to explain how to get involved in that if you wish. Rob is also active in faith-based and nonpartisan advocacy for climate solutions. He has been working to slow and solve issues of climate change since the late 1980s. And in 2013, he published the book, America's Climate Century, What Climate Change Means for America in the 21st Century and What Americans Can Do About It. And Jessica, or Jess Mazour, is the conservation coordinator for the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club. She has spent the previous decade working to pass strong agricultural and environmental protections in Iowa, as well as leading massive educational campaigns around topics that affect Iowans. You may be familiar with her ongoing work around halting the proposed carbon pipeline schemes across the state. Among many other organizational and educational projects, one is a weekly Wednesday call from 6 to 7 p.m. on the topic of pipelines that's geared toward landowners and other interested parties. She just hung up over there to join us here, and like Rob in the Climate Caucus, I'll leave it to her to list options for getting more directly involved. Okay, I'll bow out now and let these two take it from here, with Rob presenting first.
Great. Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you to the Heart of Iowa Democrats for your invitation to participate with you tonight. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited about the number of people across the state who are participating. And let me make just a quick general observation about our situation. We all have issues when it comes to land stewardship and the environment, our natural resources, and our health and the environment that we all may kind of focus on more than others, but they are all very, very serious issues. And in many cases, they are increasingly a challenge to us. You know, I think about issues like invasive species and clean water, which I know has been another part of the program. And then you add to it Gulf hypoxia, and you've got all our land pollution issues, and you've got PFAS, and you've got you know, the giant garbage patch in our oceans, and then you have the issue that I'm going to focus most on here in my opening comments, climate change and the changes in our weather patterns and our precipitation patterns, and the ranges of plants, insects, and animals, and the ecosystems disruptions that are going along with that, and extreme weather, and the warming oceans and the rising seas. And this collection of problems are all related, and they all come together. And at this defining historical moment, this is what these are the issues that we need to be pulling people across the country together on, and working cooperatively and in a positive way with people around the world. And one of the things that is so heartbreaking right now and so disappointing is that in the face of these very serious issues of environmental stewardship, at that exact moment, we have a dysfunctional democracy. we have growing income inequality, and we have just terrible issues of war and peace around the world, like Russia's attack on Ukraine. And that's just the opposite of what we need at this historical moment. So I'm really glad you've all joined with us tonight, because this is an important conversation to have. And I think Jess and I don't believe this is the end of the conversation. I think we believe this is just another step, or for some of you, maybe a beginning in the conversation. And we want you to get involved. And both Jess and I are available to help give advice on how best to get involved. I'm going to drop my contact info, my email address in the chat, so that you can feel free to email me if you would like to connect with me. That's the best way to do it. Now, I've got a couple other things I want to mention, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jess. And this will take me a couple more minutes, Jess, but I want to go through a little bit with some of the options. I am involved, as Jen said in the introduction, I'm involved with the Iowa Democratic Party Climate Caucus. I'm also involved in faith-based advocacy, and I'm involved with nonpartisan advocacy, all related to climate change. And what I want to say to you is, each of you will have a different way that feels best for you to be involved. The important thing is to get more informed and more involved and more engaged, because this is a defining challenge. And I believe 2024 is going to be a very big year in terms of politics and how we address these challenges of environmental stewardship. So if you need recommendations on how best to get involved, I'm happy to do that. In Iowa right now, we have a situation where, because our congressional delegation is entirely Republican, there are a lot of people who have felt deflated and like it's not worth doing advocacy at the national level because they're Republicans and they're awful. And I appreciate that. I hear that. I tend to agree with that. But don't let them silence you. It makes it more important to speak up now, and not just directly with their offices, but also to speak up publicly about the issues you care about, so that they hear it and maybe they'll realize, you know what, I'm going to pay a political price if I keep, doing these things. The attacks that may be happening as soon as tonight yet on the Inflation Reduction Act, clean energy and climate provisions in the U.S. House of Representatives, that's the wrong direction. And we need citizens to keep speaking up. It doesn't take a lot of time. I called Congresswoman Hinson's office yesterday, and it took me less than 5 minutes. And I said, don't repeal the clean energy provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a step in the wrong direction. Build on them. We need to do more to cut climate pollution, not less. So please keep engaged with that. Now, if you are interested in working on climate change and environmental issues and electing Democrats, and Heart of Iowa Democrats, that's what we're about here tonight, is acting on climate change and environmental issues and electing Democrats. Just because we want to elect Democrats? No, we want to elect Democrats so that we can do more to address climate change and the environment, because the Republicans are failing us on those issues. And I admire people like Jess, who are in the trenches trying to find a way to work with this Republican majority and still make progress. But the reality is they have failed us for years, and they're continuing to fail us. And we need to elect Democrats in 2024. If you are interested in working on climate and environmental issues with the Democratic Party in Iowa, I encourage you to get involved with the Climate Change and Environment Caucus that was authorized last year, and it's taken a few months. And there's been some some stress and tension about how to do it. But with when Rita Hurt became the new chair, she said, let's get a clean start on this. On May 11th, we're going to have an organizational meeting and officer elections. And I believe Jen has dropped in the chat the information about how to register for that. So that is Thursday, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. is that meeting, and it will be that meeting will be conducted by the Iowa Democratic Party Rules Committee. so that there are no questions about it being a proper constituency caucus election. And that's good. But you need to register by May 6th, because in order to participate, you have to be a registered Democrat in Iowa. And if you register and you're not a registered Democrat yet, if you register by May 6th, the party will give you that additional time to cure that problem so that you can register as a Democrat and participate. So I hope you'll all be there. I have been serving as the chair since January, and I expect at this point to be running to continue to be chair, but we really want to assemble a bigger team. And if there are other people who are looking for leadership opportunities, please feel free to contact me. It's an opportunity for leadership in the party. It's an opportunity to help educate ourselves and candidates and the public, to message on climate, to run and win on climate. Polling data nationally shows that the climate change and the environment is one of the issues where Democrats have the biggest advantage over Republicans. So we should talk about it. It doesn't mean it's the most important issue for every single voter, but it is an issue where Democrats have a major advantage, and it helps our candidates talk about it. And with the Climate Caucus, we want to help our candidates talk about it. President Biden, I just want to make an observation here. He ran on climate change with TV ads in 2 states that he narrowly won, Arizona and Michigan. And to me, that is a sign that it's a winner in parts of the country, across the country. And in our area, Iowa Democrats, we didn't have success in the 2022 elections, but across the river in Moline and Rock Island and Rockford, Eric Sorensen ran and won an open congressional seat there as a climate champion. I believe it is an issue that resonates and can win if we message about it well, and if we can articulate it well. It affects everything else we do. Climate change, when I wrote my book in 2013, I said, if we don't eventually deal with climate change, everything else we care about is going to be like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It affects the economy. Think about the disaster damage and the disruption that causes to our economy. It affects our economy, the solutions do. Because if we do more solar power and more energy efficiency and more energy conservation and more walkable and bikeable communities and better transit options, those create jobs. And in fact, the Inflation Reduction Act is already at work creating jobs in clean energy industries across the country. It affects immigration. Why is it that we have so many people, so many refugees in the world? Well, climate change is a driver of people who are seeking refugee status and are forced into migration. The stories from Central America about climate disasters there, driving people to seek a better future somewhere else. And you see it out of Europe with the disruptions in Syria and Africa and people seeking a better home. And it affects national security. If we weren't so dependent on fossil fuels, Russia would not have the money it currently has to wage war. So let's break our dependence on fossil fuels, and let's create a more sustainable, prosperous, healthier future for all of us. So those are my opening thoughts. Jess, I do want to turn it over to you now. So I'll let you further introduce yourself, and thanks for being a part of this program with me tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and thanks for sharing all that information. I am Jessica Mazour. I'm the Conservation Program Coordinator with the Sierra Club Iowa chapter. And tonight I'm going to talk about carbon pipelines. And you may wonder, well, what does that have to do with some of this air quality and climate change stuff? And well, it has everything to do with it. It's kind of putting a story to what this looks like in real life when we don't take air quality and climate change seriously, and when false solutions to climate change come to the forefront, despite us knowing that there are real solutions to climate change. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to share my screen here. So for those of you that haven't really heard what's going on, I'm going to kind of do a really quick recap just so you're not wondering, well, what is this carbon pipeline stuff? There are 3 carbon pipelines being proposed in Iowa. The first one that you see on the screen, this is the Summit route. It's Summit Carbon Solutions. and they're going to be collecting emissions, air emissions from ethanol plants across the state and other ethanol facilities in the Midwest, and taking that gas and turning it into a liquid and piping it somewhere for storage, which we'll talk about in a minute. This next one here that's blue, this is Navigator. This is the second carbon pipeline to apply in the state. And the same thing, they're going to be collecting air emissions at all of these little points that are ethanol plants along their route and taking that gas, converting it to a liquid and shipping it somewhere to store. And then same thing with Wolf. And Wolf, let me go back there. Wolf goes from Cedar Rapids over to Illinois. It's a much shorter pipeline, but it's the exact same concept. So you can see pretty much every corner of the state is impacted. And what we're seeing is that every corner of the state is saying no way. So why are there 3 pipelines all coming at the same time of this new kind called carbon pipelines or CO2 pipelines? Well, it's this whole carbon capture and storage process. This is being done in the name of solving climate change. And what the theory behind it is, it's a 3-step process. First, we will find an industry in Iowa. It's being targeted at ethanol plants, but it doesn't have to be ethanol plants. It could be coal-fired power plants, could be fertilizer plants, you name it. They start with capturing the emissions that would come out of the smokestack in the name of climate change. They say, we're going to stop it from going into the air. We're going to capture it. Well, the problem is it's not all 100% pure CO2. So the first step is they have to separate out the carbon dioxide. Now with ethanol, it is pretty close to 100% pure CO2, which is why we're seeing them start with ethanol plants, but they do have to do some separation. And what do they do with all the other stuff that's not carbon dioxide? Release it back into the atmosphere. So step 1, capture it, separate out the CO2, and then it's not very feasible to transfer this in gas form. So they have to take the CO2 and pressurize it into a liquid under upwards of 2,200 PSI. And then that's the second part, piping it somewhere. And that's where a lot of what we're seeing in Iowa, these pipelines, they have to get it from point A to point B. The third step, and this is why they're saying this is a solution to climate change, is that they're going to permanently sequester this CO2 underground forever. And then we won't have to do anything to change our current system because we can capture emissions and put them underground. We'll talk about why this isn't the case in a minute, but that's the theory behind it. But why is it happening? It's because there's a lot of money behind this. There is a federal tax credit called the 45Q, and it is a tax credit meant to be used on climate change solutions. And right now it's being used for carbon capture and storage. These pipelines alone, just these 3, could receive upwards of $30 billion in federal tax credits for their private profits to build these pipelines. So what are the issues? Why are there so many people in Iowa that are fed up about this? There's a number of them. I'll dig in on climate change the most tonight since that's kind of the topic, but we'll do just a brief overview of some of the other big reasons. Is one, we know it damages our land, pipeline construction. We saw this during the Dakota Access Pipeline. These are huge pieces of equipment that come in, they compact the soil, they mess up drainage tile systems, they mix topsoil and other layers of soil, and then we end up with soil that is completely damaged and unable to be used to grow crops or whatever use. If you had a forest, it's going to be cut down and you cannot plant a tree back onto that easement. So we know that this damages our land. So these private companies that want to take our money and our land also do damage to the land in the process. The second big reason that we hear out there is that eminent domain should not be used for private gain. So in order to build these pipelines, they need access to thousands of Iowans' land. And rightfully so, many Iowans are not signing easements. They're refusing to, so they will potentially be subject to eminent domain. And eminent domain has a purpose. We use it for things that are truly in the public use, water lines. We use it for roads and bridges and things that we use that benefit us. But these pipelines aren't in the public use. It's, again, a private company taking a toxic gas across our communities and then making money off of it for themselves. And that leads into the third reason that we hear a lot of people saying is that this whole thing, we're paying for the pipelines to profit. those tax credits alone are enough to pay for their entire upfront infrastructure costs. So we truly are paying for them to profit from these pipelines. Other thing we know is carbon pipelines are dangerous. These aren't like other pipelines that we're used to here in the state. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air and it displaces oxygen. So if there's a rupture, it's not just going to go up into the air and dissipate, it's going to settle in low-lying areas and displace oxygen. So if you're in that area, you won't be able to breathe. It is a toxicant and an asphyxiant, so we know that carbon dioxide can kill you. And if you think, well, I'll just get in my car and I'll drive away, hopefully your car starts because your gas combustion engine requires oxygen to work. Same with all the EMS people that might be coming to try to save you if there was a rupture. How are they going to get to you with an ambulance or with a fire truck or with a police vehicle if they won't work without oxygen? We know that when there's a rupture, because there was a rupture in 2020 down in Mississippi, that it can travel really fast and really far. A test rupture in Europe, the CO2 spread 1,300 feet in under 4 minutes. So you have 4 minutes to know you're being gassed when it's an odorless and colorless gas and to escape. In Mississippi, they had 49 people hospitalized, over 300 evacuated. And we know that people are still having health effects from breathing in the CO2. PHMSA, the Federal Pipeline Agency, is actually going to be doing some hearings coming up in Des Moines on carbon pipeline safety. And then the last reason, which I'm going to talk most about, is that these carbon pipelines, Summit Navigator and Wolf pipelines, are not a climate change solution, and they shouldn't be taking climate change money. We shouldn't be paying for it, and they shouldn't be able to take people's land to do this as well. So we know there's many reasons it's not a climate change solution, despite what these companies say. It does not address other forms of emissions or pollution from fossil fuel extraction and industrial agriculture. So rather than, because we know that the ethanol industry and industrial agriculture industry is a huge contributor to air emissions here in the state. So rather than building an agricultural system that helps combat climate change, rather than contribute to it, we know ethanol uses a lot of water and also contributes to climate change. So rather than weaning ourselves off of ethanol, we are allowing this whole system of ag and ethanol to continue as it is. And we're saying we're just going to put a Band-Aid at the smokestack, do everything business as usual, and call it good. But at the end of the day, we haven't changed the systems that are actually contributing to climate change. So there's number one. This does not address other emissions or forms of pollution from fossil fuel extraction in industrial agriculture. This also, we know, uses massive amounts of energy at the capture sites and at the pumping stations. So when they have to capture that CO2 and separate it and pressurize it down into a liquid, requires a massive amount of energy. And we know ethanol plants already use a massive amount of energy. And we know some ethanol plants are still coal-fired for their energy system. So we're actually be increasing the amount of energy these ethanol plants use just to capture the CO2. And then along the route, in order to keep the pressure up in the pipeline, they're going to have pumping stations. Those pumping stations also require a massive amount of energy. And those are going to be in locations where they're probably not, near Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, or some of the other big areas that have Mid-American or Alliant Energy. They're going to be local RECs, rural electric cooperatives, that are going to be asked to expand their facilities and produce more energy for these pumping stations and for the ethanol plants. So we are not just capturing emissions, we're increasing emissions as well at the same time. And there's nothing in these plans that says they will actually capture any emissions from the power plants at these ethanol plants. So they might capture the emission or at the capture equipment at the ethanol plants. So they might be capturing some emissions from the actual ethanol plant operations itself, but all this new equipment to capture and pressurize it will not be captured. Another thing that's a huge red flag for these pipelines is that these pipeline companies say they're going to pump this and store it underground forever. But what we know is that almost all of the current CCS or carbon capture and storage projects don't just sequester it. They actually use it for a process called enhanced oil recovery. Enhanced oil recovery is when an oil field is depleted and it might be hard to get that last little bit of oil out. So if you pump the CO2 in the ground, you can get the oil out easier. Why do we think that's a possibility on these 3 pipelines? Well, Summit's going to North Dakota near the Bakken oil fields, and Navigator and Wolf are going down to Illinois areas that both also have depleted oil fields. So the likelihood of enhanced oil recovery for these projects is high. We've asked all 3 pipeline companies. Some have been wishy-washy about it, but it's definitely something they don't want to admit, because if they use the CO2 to pump out more oil out of the ground to be burned, they lose their climate change argument completely. Another thing, long-term storage isn't proven. So we're hoping that if we pump all this CO2 under the ground, we hope it stays there forever, but we don't know that. And in fact, states like North Dakota have actually changed it so after a certain amount of time, the liability of all that CO2 underground switches back to the public. It's no longer on the company. And so what happens if there's a leak? When we know that there's leaky oil wells, we know that when you pump CO2 or pump anything into the ground, you can, just like fracking, you can create earthquakes and fissures in the ground. If that CO2 ever releases, we're talking incredibly dangerous. That is a massive amount of CO2, way worse than a pipeline rupture would ever be. The only example we have of this is in Cameroon, in Africa. I forget what year, I want to say it was in the 80s. There's a natural CO2 deposit underground below a lake, and it erupted at some point. I'm not quite sure how or why, but it all of a sudden released all of the gas from this pocket. It was natural. It was not part of a CCS project, and it went for miles and miles. Thousands of people died because they had no oxygen to breathe. So we're hoping the CO2 stays down there forever, but we don't know. So bottom line, it's not a climate change solution because this delays action on real climate change solution. We have so many departments in the state right now focused on CCS pipelines and carbon pipelines rather than real climate change solutions. We've diverted their time and energy away from projects that we know work. We've also redirected a lot of money that should be going to real climate change solutions, but instead we're putting it into these 45Q federal tax credits to give to carbon pipeline companies. And then if that didn't prove that this isn't a good use of our money for climate change solutions, is we have kind of an example that we're following down in Australia. It's the Chevron Gorgon CCS project, largest in the world. And they were similar to our projects here in Iowa, given public money to implement these systems. Since they've been in operation, their emissions have increased more than 50%, despite having the world's largest CCS system. So they have not had a decrease in emissions, an actual increase. The amount that they've captured over the past 3 years has decreased. So the stuff they're supposedly pumping underground has decreased every single year for the past 3 years. And then we have the numbers of the big on-site emissions jumping up. And then lastly, this company missed their target by 5 million tons. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to buy the equivalent amount in carbon offsets and invest 40 million in low carbon energy projects. So all we see is money traveling around, switching hands, credits traveling around, switching hands. But what hasn't changed is the actual emissions going into the air. It's actually increased. So we just know these are not solutions to climate change. But I work at the Sierra Club Iowa chapter. So what do we support? We're not just against things. We support directing time, money, and resources to actual known climate change solutions. This graph here on the screen shows, this is from the 2021 greenhouse gas emission report. So we know where the emissions are coming from. We need to work on making those systems be better for our climate. And if we have an industry that's a major polluter, we need to think about how we transition away from that rather than just putting Band-Aids on it. We definitely need to transition our energy system away from fossil fuels. And one of the big things that Sierra Club has been working on, more so before the carbon pipelines, because that's really sucked up a lot of our time in the last 2 years, but soil health initiatives. Those are going to be some of the best things that we can do here in the state to combat climate change. Just think about how are we building healthy soil in a way that captures CO2 into the ground rather than releases it, because we know that our current ag system is very leaky, whether it's confinement operations, livestock facilities, the fact that we're tilling the ground, just the way we produce ethanol, you name it. The whole ag system is a huge emitter in Iowa. And then lastly, we think that we should be investing our time, money, and resources in wind, solar, electric vehicles, and battery storage. That would be a much better use of our money, resources to fix air quality issues and climate change. Then just lastly, to close it out, is just kind of what you can do and know that you're not alone. There's a lot of people that oppose this. 78% of Iowans oppose eminent domain for carbon pipelines. That came out in a recent poll. So that shows us that this is an issue that crosses party lines. When they did the breakdown of this poll, it didn't matter if you were rural or urban, young or old, Republican or Democrat, everyone was opposed to these projects. So it's allowed us to build a really good united coalition of unlikely allies that are working together to stop the pipelines. And if you remember those top 5 reasons that we hear why people are against them, there's a reason for everyone. Some people might be way more interested in the eminent domain and property rights angle, and Democrats and others might be more interested in public money and climate change angle of this. But it's brought a lot of people together. And through our work, we've actually, I think we could have a huge impact on elections the next cycle, because there are some clear targets in the Iowa House and Iowa Senate working against Iowa landowners for these pipelines. And it would be a really good opportunity for someone to step in those districts and work on this issue specifically. I think that we could really see some seats flip in very interesting parts of the state. But landowners are opposing this. This is Hardin County. This is where Bruce Rastetter, who owns Summit Carbon Solutions, lives. Red parcels have not signed easements. So you can see his own neighbors don't want his pipeline. And on the entire Summit route alone, they still have 1,008 unsigned easements. Navigator and Wolf haven't gotten that far, so we do not know their numbers yet. And 44 out of 56 counties that are impacted by pipelines have formally objected. 23 towns and cities have formally objected. 21 local entities that include school district, boards of health, emergency management, tons of Republican central committees. We should get some Democratic central committees on the list too. But lots of local entities, fire departments are objecting, townships. We have scientists, economists, and environmental leaders who are saying, but we can do better than the proposed pipelines. Science indicates that they are poor investments and unlikely to have a meaningful effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You'll probably recognize a lot of the names on this joint letter that was submitted to the Iowa Utilities Board. So you can join this huge group of people and fight back by 2 upcoming action steps that would be helpful. There's a lot more to do beyond this, but one is add your name to the list of objectors. We have probably over 1,000 objections between individual Iowans, counties, cities, and other entities. So I will put in the chat here a link so that you can submit an objection. And it could be as simple as these pipelines are not good for Iowa, vote no. It could be specific that they're not climate change solutions, or maybe you've learned a lot more about these because there's so many other angles to learn about, especially safety. You could submit an objection because of safety. The next thing that you could do is, especially if you want to learn more, is come to the monthly Iowa Utilities Board meeting. It's on Tuesday, May 9th at 9 a.m. You don't have to say anything. You can just listen. But the goal at that meeting is we just had 2 of the 3 decision makers on the Iowa Utilities Board just either retired or resigned. So we have 2 of 3 new decision makers. And so we're going to use that meeting to bring them up to speed. So if you want to get brought up to speed, attend it and listen. We're going to talk about everything that's happened over the past 2 years to make sure these new Iowa Utilities Board members understand what's happened and what's at stake. So that would be a really good opportunity to learn more and hear from the landowners that are being asked to give up their land right now, because there's going to be a lot of them coming to Des Moines. But with that, I think to just close with saying this is, not specific air quality presentation with data on where does it all come from, but it puts it down into real life of this is what it shows up as in our communities. And this is how we can have an impact on air quality, is making sure that boondoggles like this don't move forward and that we focus our energy and our money on real climate change solutions and not private profit projects for people like Bruce Rastetter and BlackRock. So hopefully we'll see you on Tuesday, and please submit an objection. Thank you very much for letting me present this today.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jess, for that very thorough and outstanding presentation about the problems with the proposed carbon pipelines. We've had a number of questions come in, and I just want to start with one that's directly related to the issue that you shared. And let me just share my thoughts on this, because even though I recognize there may at some point in some place at some time be a role for carbon capture, this is not it. This proposal does not make sense. First of all, it's very hazardous substance that you're talking about, and to compel people to give up their property to run a hazardous substance through the pipeline across your property, it offends my sense of right and wrong that somebody could do that to my property. And I certainly have empathy for those people who are facing that. The land damage itself from the pipeline is bad for climate. I mean, we need to be doing more natural resource solutions and more soil health, and this would take us in the wrong direction. And you know, just the construction impacts alone. You know, we've got to be in. We have to be transitioning away from fossil fuels, and this proposal doesn't do it. And there are better alternatives. And the idea that we would have this kind of money for this, and then at the same time you have an Iowa legislature that's led by Republicans that stopped the solar energy tax credit, that gutted energy efficiency programs, that imposed new taxes on vehicle registration fees. You know, I'd be a little more sympathetic if they showed any other sign of wanting to do something about climate change other than this. And as you've explained, Jess, great job. Not a solution that will work. One question that came up: is there an environmental impact statement being prepared, or is there any environmental review for taking property across Iowa for this purpose?
That is a really good question, because we tried to get a cumulative impact study, because the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA have say over the actual environmental impact statements, but the state of Iowa could go above and beyond and do an environmental impact study, do the cumulative effect of the pipeline, and the IUB said no. We asked them to do that along with the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, and the Winnebago tribe actually initiated that, and we supported it. And yeah, IUB says no, they will not be doing an environmental impact study here in the state. There is in Minnesota, I'm not sure, I don't think they call it Iowa Utilities Board, maybe a Public Service Commission. They have ordered some environmental reviews of the route up in Minnesota, but that is something we think is really critical, because we know they're going to be crossing areas that are, you know, we have lots of wetlands, and we have lots of highly erodible land, and we have river crossings and forest reserves and state parks and artifacts and endangered species, you name it. All of that, we need to understand the impact.
Yep. Well, thank you, Jess, so much for that, for reviewing that issue, because that is a timely issue that is right in front of us, and it's really important for Iowans to know more about it. I do want to address some of the other questions that have come in, and they are largely asking about the air that we breathe, and what's in our air and things like that. I'm gonna address it first, and if Jess wants to add in, she should feel free to do that. But here's the deal. We have in Iowa, we have by some measures, and I'm not an expert on this, and I don't think Jess considers herself currently an expert on some of this stuff, although she was at a time. But right now we have elevated health problems in Iowa. We have, you know, there was the report out earlier, end of 2022 or early 2023, that Iowa is second in the nation for our cancer rate. That's a very serious problem. Iowa also has elevated rates of asthma and other respiratory problems. And though cancer can be air pollution related, and respiratory problems frequently are related to air pollution problems. And what's Iowa have in our air? Well, you know, the fossil fuels are a large source of pollution, even in a state like Iowa. I think people have the perception, since we haven't necessarily had smog the way Los Angeles had smog in the 1970s, that Iowa doesn't have air pollution problems, but we do. And fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal are significant contributors to that. The Sierra Club has done a lot of work on the hot spots around coal plants in Iowa, and there is an ongoing effort to try to close down our coal plants, and that would help. Beyond the fossil fuels, we do have industrial processes. We also have agriculture-related processes, farm chemicals, and those are problems. So, you know, it's been a few years for me, but going back and thinking about the discussions about animal confinements, there are real problems there. And unfortunately, the legislature has not taken action on those issues. And the Iowa Supreme Court last year made it worse by limiting the rights of people to bring nuisance lawsuits. So we do have those problems. What I would say is, if you want to get people to help, try your county public health department. There is monitoring equipment available, and continue to work for more sustainable solutions. Jess, do you have any sort of thoughts on the air pollution issues that people are worried about, what they're breathing and what's in our air?
Yeah, the one I used to do a lot of work on animal agriculture and confinement operations. So that's kind of where I used to be more of an expert than I am now. But I'd say for rural people living out in the country, that's a big worry. I noticed that Joyce Otto's on here. Joyce knows firsthand just what can happen if you live in air confinement, breathing in the ammonia and breathing in the other stuff in the air. So if you can smell it, you're breathing in something that's hazardous for you. If you can't smell it anymore, that doesn't mean it went away. It means you have become used to it and you're still breathing it in, but you're not actually sensing it anymore. But that's a big, something that's very concerning for people out in the country.
You know, and let me just add a couple other thoughts on that. I mean, because obviously Heart of Iowa Democrats in kind of in our own backyard, we had the problem with the plant that exploded and caught fire in Marengo.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to what happened with the rail derailment in East Lebanon, Ohio. Very similar to the plastics plant that caught on fire in Richmond, Indiana. And these hazards are out there, and it does call for a stronger and more effective regulatory presence to make sure we don't have these kinds of problems. It doesn't have to be bad for business. A lot of regulations can help businesses, because if you can avoid these problems, it saves everybody. It saves the emotional heartache and trauma of the health problems that people experience, and also avoids a lot of liability for the plants that are affected. I also want to point out, there's been this debate, and you hear some of the well, let me just say the right-wing talk radio people, making a big deal. Don't take away our gas stoves and things like that. Well, if you have natural gas appliances in your house, those natural gas appliances do contribute to air pollution problems in your own home.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily an immediate hazard that you need to immediately remove your natural gas stove. But as you're looking to replace a stove, it makes sense to look for something that doesn't bring the fossil fuels into your own house. And there are health benefits to doing that. So there are, when you get into public health, when you get into air pollution, air quality, there are a lot of technical issues, but it tends to be that the solutions to one problem, like climate change, are also the solutions to a problem like the air quality inside your own house or in your own community. So those are good questions.
I would add that too, is if you can find that local thing, like air quality is a perfect one, because if it's impacting you, it's probably impacting your neighbor too. When you can identify things that are impacting people locally, that's where you can cross bridges and build relationships with people that you might not think. And that's where the power is. That's what we found on this pipeline fight, is we're working with a lot of people across the aisle, because once you find something that impacts you all directly, you are more likely to do something. So it could be a way to build power for the Democrats too.
Well, and you know, just let's talk about that as an election issue. What we really do need candidates in our state to run sort of and raise these issues. You know, we haven't been winning enough elections without raising them. So I kind of think 2024 is a good year for candidates to say, you know what, I'm going to run as an environmental champion. And here's the thing, when you look at the polling data nationally, and I think the similar data would apply in Iowa. And of course, it's not just about polls, because as you talk about issues, you educate people on issues, and it becomes a dynamic process. But if you just take the current polls, it is the climate and the environment is one of the issues where Democrats are generally regarded much better than Republicans. So it doesn't have to be everybody's most important issue, but it is certainly an issue that our candidates should be talking more about, and then acting more on, because it is something that the public really does want. And Republicans really, at this point, have no credibility on it at all. I mean, as I'm watching them nationally, and they want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, and they want to take away clean energy incentives. And at the same time, they want to compel the production and sale of fossil fuels. And for example, in HR 1 in March, Republicans passed a provision. It's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, but they passed a provision that would have mandated the construction of the Keystone Pipeline and the eminent domain that goes with that. So I don't know, Jess, what do you think? How can you get how could candidates do a better job messaging on these issues?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question too, because it's hard to kind of figure out what is going to work to resonate with the most amount of people. And what I've learned in this carbon pipeline fight is if you stick to something that really impacts them, then you can bring people onto your side. So I definitely have different talking points, knowing my audience. You know, if I'm talking to the group tonight, we're definitely going to talk about climate change and the false solutions of CCS. But I might have different talking points when I'm talking with like Republican county supervisors or Republican senators, and I focus a bit more on, eminent domain or land destruction. I always slip in climate change because the pipeline companies are making this about climate change. But that has worked to kind of build those relationships with people across the aisle. And what we've seen through this is that it's actually moving people along a little bit. Whereas at the beginning, when we were first meeting a lot of these landowners who tend to be more Republican, it was very much, climate change isn't real. We don't want to talk about that at all. And not to say everyone has moved along the ladder, but some people are more willing to think about it, talk about it. We've opened the door to have that conversation. And I think it will work with elections too. You just have to message it right, because if we stop the pipelines, no matter how you say it, we're helping the climate by stopping the pipelines. So we just have to kind of be strategic about messaging. And I did put in the chat a short list of representatives and senators who are very vulnerable in the next election because they are going against their constituents in their own county. There's probably a few more I could add to the list, but I think that messaging it right around carbon pipelines and climate change and these other issues, we could really make some inroads in districts we never thought we had a chance, because people are very mad at their Republican representatives and senators right now.
Yeah, and I just want to add another real tangible way that climate change is affecting Iowans. So in addition to these health issues and the insults to landowners that are being talked about, we continue to see in Iowa more and more extreme weather. And right now we have flooding across the entire east coast of Iowa due to the Mississippi River, due to the near record or record snowpack in Minnesota. And that, by the way, that is consistent with everything the climate experts have said. They said in a warmer world, you get more precipitation, you get more extreme events. And so you have that. At the exact same time in Lynn County, where I live, we've only had 1.2 inches of rain in April, when normally we would have 3.6 inches of rain in April. And there is no rain in the 15-day forecast. And so, we're coming off a couple years of drought here. And then the other thing that you're seeing is with invasive species and ecological disruptions and harmed our natural resources. And then, of course, you have the added element of it's not just climate change by itself. Then you have people making bad decisions, and Republicans, boy, are they about bad decisions when it comes to protecting our public lands and our natural resources at a state level. And they are making it worse by starving the Department of Natural Resources of funds they need. They've attacked in the last couple of years our forest reserve program, trying to abolish the forest reserve program. After the derecho show in 2020, they proposed legislation to abolish the forest reserve program and the incentives. So there are lots of issues out there that we need to be talking about as citizens and as Iowans. And there are a lot of issues out there that as Democrats, we can run on and win if we show that we care about our natural resources, our water, our air, our climate, and pursuing solutions that actually work and create jobs, grow businesses, and safeguard our people and property from the growing dangers of climate change. One other point I want to make about the politics, and I want to see if we've got any other questions that have come in or that are really important that I may have missed. Jen, I'm going to look to you to see if there are any questions I've maybe missed. But the other important point I want to make is climate solutions, unlike the carbon pipelines that Jess was talking about, which have a price tag in the billions, a lot of climate solutions actually save people money. Solar power, once you've made that initial investment, the sun is free. A more fuel efficient car uses less gas. An electric vehicle doesn't use gas, so you save that cost. And especially with the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for home improvements and electric vehicle purchases, those solutions are more available to regular consumers than they've ever been before. And I hope we can message not only can we solve climate change by doing these solutions, but we'll actually save consumers money. Because people seem to think, well, yeah, I might want to do that solution, but it costs too much. Well, actually, it's going to save you money. And spending $3 billion on a carbon pipeline, that's not going to save anybody money. So, Jen, I'm looking to you to see if we've got any other questions that have come in that I may have missed.
I had a private one come in that I think that you both did address, which is essentially what direction are we heading, big picture. But I think that what you're talking about, the proliferation of CAFOs and these carbon pipeline projects.
Yeah, let's maybe talk a little bit about the big picture. Say 10 or 20 years, Jess, these problems are not going to they're not going to go away. They're not going to get, they may get easier to solve in some ways as the price of the solutions continue to come down. But what are your thoughts sort of looking into the crystal ball here of the next 10 or 20 years?
I think we have a really rare opportunity right now to change the trajectory, because I think right now we're on the path to catering to industries, and those industries that exist in Iowa that are very powerful, also polluting industries. And so I think we have this unique moment where we can talk with people that we don't usually talk with and hopefully change some hearts and minds in the direction of the state, because Iowa in general has been avoiding the whole question of what's the future of agriculture. And it's that question's forced on us right now. What is the future? Is it pipelines and ethanol, or is it not? So we're in this pivotal moment, not just in Iowa, but I think globally too, because we've never seen more conversations about climate change. We're seeing direct impacts of people on the front lines who are impacted by climate change today, not just in the future. So I think that the opportunity is here right now if we act on it and if we take it to change the trajectory. Because if we don't do something, we know where we're headed. We know that we're headed towards, mass disruption in our climate and our weather patterns, and it'll only get more expensive the longer we wait. It's like we have to take this opportunity now and do everything we can.
Well, and I think that's a good point, Jess. I'll just point out, for example, that right now, if you put an acre into corn for ethanol, you're going to produce a lot less energy than if you put that acre into solar panels. And it's not a, it's, you know, if you're using the corn for ethanol, it's not a food versus fuel issue there. So you know, and I'm not saying that's my preferred option is to put solar panels on farms. I mean, we've got lots of urban area that needs solar panels. You know, lots of industrial old industrial areas that we should have solar panels. I'm excited to see towns like Marshalltown embracing solar power, and they've got a couple projects going there that are very exciting. So that is part of the future of our state. And I will tell you my sense is the fastest growing portion of the agricultural market right now are local growers producing food where they can have a relationship with their consumers. And I think people are increasingly interested in knowing where's their food coming from, and do they have a relationship with that farmer, and that's good. So we should continue to grow that industry rapidly as possible, become as much of an outlet as we can for some of the urban areas that are near Iowa, but not in Iowa, like the Twin Cities and Chicago and St. Louis and Kansas City and Omaha, and really take advantage of that. And we can build a very healthy, a very prosperous future if we embrace clean, renewable energy like solar, wind, and coupled with the battery storage. I think it makes a lot of sense for our state. But there's a lot of commentary in the chat. I wish I had time to follow it all, but thank you for sharing that. And get involved. That's the final message. You know how to get a hold of Jess and the Sierra Club and the issues that they're in the fight on that issue, and they need your help. And then we need the longer term vision. Get involved with Democrats, or if it's more your style, get involved in the nonpartisan advocacy. And I'm more than happy to talk to people about those opportunities. Sign up for the Climate and Environmental Caucus by May 6th, so you can participate in the organizational meeting on Thursday, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. I'm excited about our future. I think I think those of us who are concerned about environmental sustainability and understand that we need to act and that we have solutions that work, I think we're on the right side of history. So get involved, get involved, take action, join in, and let's turn Iowa around and safeguard our people, our property, and build a healthy and sustainable future. Kathy or Jen, do you want to make an announcement about your next program coming up on Wednesday, May 3rd?
Yeah, I think it would be fantastic. Thank you for leaving it there. I love the idea of returning to real food and answering the questions that we have been dodging from an agricultural perspective. So once again, we would love to thank Rob Hogg and Jessica Mazour for taking the time tonight to share just a fraction of what they've learned through their work and to invite us toward yet more direct action. I really appreciated the entry point examples through public health. Those consequences are becoming so clear. Also, a big thank you to those who are helping behind the scenes tonight: Genevieve Johnson, Suzanne Kavish, Sarah Smith, and our communications chair, Kathy Focht. If you have not yet, you can sign up for the next and final 2 sessions in this Earth to Iowa series at heartofiowadems.com/register. A reminder that the recording of this event is available on the Heart of Iowa Facebook page and will be up on our YouTube channel. Kathy will send an email with the links to both of those, as well as a list of resources shared in the chat. Next Wednesday, we will drill down into soil quality and contamination on May 3rd, and then finally on May 10th, the effects of a warming climate on food and animals, with the topic of public health, again, weaving its way through each session. And again, the registration link is heartofiowadems.com/register. That's it from us, and good night for now. Thanks for keeping the series going.
Thank you so much for inviting us.